Hello. So, the story of Marah, where the water was bitter, right? This is one that, especially when I've had like stressful weeks, and this was one, um, like, in just different seasons of my life, I've related so much to this story, right? So, the children of Israel are coming out of Egypt. They have been, they've witnessed all of the plagues and all of the things that finally turned Pharaoh's heart to let them go. And then they have just basically, they're following an angel of the Lord that's like a pillar of cloud, pillar of fire, right? And then they get to the point where they're at the water, they're at the Red Sea, and Moses is talking to God, and he parts the Red Sea, and the angel of the Lord goes from in front of them to behind them, between them and the Pharaoh's army, and that Pharaoh's army is, washed away, and basically they come out of it, and it's this total miracle, and everybody's just in awe, right? And then they go on, and I always remember the story when they come to Marah and the water is bitter. They're thirsty. They come to a place, the water is bitter, and then people start to grumble, right? And it's one of those things that I've always kind of been like, oh, how can you lose faith like after all the things they have seen? But then as I was reading it again this time, because the Lord really put it on my heart, because I was just struggling with some bitterness myself, right? Over some of the stuff, the medical stuff that I'm dealing with. Anyways, um, don't want to talk about that. But I reread it and I realized like maybe I've been a little hard on them, like as because it does specify that they come through the Red Sea and all this miraculous stuff happens, but then they're going on for 3 days. They're walking in the desert area for 3 days and there's no water. And during that time, it doesn't say anything about them grumbling or complaining or being bitter or anything. But then they come to Marah. They see a spring of water, and then they find that that water is bitter. Then the grumbling begins. Then the contents of the cup, and like that parallel they've given, and I've heard where it's like whatever is in your heart when you're jostled, when that's what spills out. So like, if you yell or shout or then you have that in your heart. It's just not really showing until you're jostled, right? But like you shake a cup of coffee, water's not going to spill from it. It's going to spill coffee, right? So, anyways, they get rattled, and the grumbling and complaining and the doubt starts to come out, right? And um, to me, I really do relate with it now that now that I understand the story a little bit better. I'm thinking of the story more complete. That because they weren't grumbling, they weren't complaining, they were going forward. They still, I think, probably had some of that awe, even though they were thirsty. But then, they see water, and they're thinking, "Oh, finally, we have the water. We received water. This is the next miracle, right? Like this next provision of God." And then they go to drink it, and it's bitter. I get it. I get the grumbling and being like, wait, what? Like, come on, what did you do all this for? But if you're gonna just let us die here, basically, and um, but then that's where Moses starts. It prays to the Lord, and the Lord shows him this stick. It's like throw it in the water, and then the water is made sweet, and well, or fresh. They can drink the water, and so there is a provision there. And so sometimes it's like it's understanding for me that expectation, right? Like that hope deferred makes the heart sick. Like when they see it and they think they know, okay, now is the time we get the water, right? And then it's not, something's wrong. And then that's when it's really difficult, because that hope deferred makes the heart sick, and that heart sickness comes out. And it's like but it's like the hope is deferred because they stopped, like in those moments, like because and I'll say me too, like in these moments I stop, like my faith shifts from being on the Lord to just, oh look, Lord is providing me this thing, and suddenly my faith starts to be in this thing. And then that's when my heart gets sick, because that thing cannot do what the Lord can do. It is still from the Lord, and the Lord does things where it might be used in a different way than I was expecting, or whatever else, And in this situation, he does make the water sweet, but he has somewhere better for them to be. They go on a little ways after that, and then they get to Elim, and there's 12 springs. Like, there's plenty of water for everybody, right? And but he tested them there. And I think that sometimes there are things that when the Lord is like testing us, like, I don't think it's quite like it is in the Old Testament where he's really like testing, so much as it's like the Lord is showing us ourselves, like what's in the cup, what happens when we get rattled, what's still there. Because as we go forward, it's like the Lord will deal with us a layer at a time, right? Thank you, Lord, because if we can't deal with all of the things that are in our hearts, all the problems, it's like a little bit at a time, right? And so sometimes he uses situations to show us that next layer, that next thing, that next thing that he's got, like, that he wants us to deal with, that we need to bring to him, that we need to recognize about ourselves, because we can't submit something to him that we don't even know is there, you know what I mean? But and it's an opportunity for faith, right? And not only this, but like the difference is like between the masses, as it says, where it's saying they start to grumble and they start to, say all these things, is that they're talking to each other, right? Moses talks to the Lord and he gets an answer. But when we start talking to each other about stuff, we don't really get good answers. We just get grumbly. That's usually what happens, right? But because I know I've said that like so many times, like people, I used to say, oh, I just need to vent. I need to vent. I don't need to vent. Nobody needs to vent. I don't believe in venting anymore. I don't, because I don't have like that's the idea that, now I'm mixing metaphors, but like that's the idea that whatever's wrong is in a cup, right? And I can just dump it out and it's gone and now I feel better. But that's not really what is inside of me anyway. It's like, for me, like dumping out that cup just gets the wheel going and starts the whole machine running, and then I can, like it doesn't stop, right? It's not like I'm emptying out. It starts the factory running, and then I start producing all the negative thinking and stuff. It makes itself go, right? But um in these times, when we bring it to the Lord, it's like with an expectancy, like, because Moses is going, okay, you did all of these things. Moses has had even more of that, like, the burning bush experience and all of the stuff that the Lord did to bring him to even start this process of going up against Pharaoh, right? So he's like, okay, we've done these things. People need water. Now what? This water's bitter. What do I do, right? With an expectancy that there's an answer. There must be something here. There must be something I'm supposed to do, or not necessarily do, because for us, in like metaphorically speaking, sometimes it's like different because we're not dealing with this situation. So it might not be something for us to do, but an attitude we need to change, or to stop trusting in something we think where the answer is, to reshift our focus, to get our faith back on the Lord and not in what we thought he was providing that has now become different, right? And so, anyways, but then in these instances with the testing or whatever you want to call it, like, I do also always like to remember that it is an invitation. It's an invitation to faith, right? And I think it's kind of interesting because when I started, the story that made me recognize that as kind of a cool thing, kind of an interesting thing, was we always talk about doubting Thomas. He has kind of a bad rap too. I don't know if he necessarily deserves it, but in the situation, right? Because we'll say doubting Thomas, and he they told him that Jesus had returned, right? Like, so Jesus appears to the other disciples, but Thomas is not present. And then when they tell him, he says, I'm not going to believe. And I get it, right? They have put, just like in this story, they have put all this faith and expectancy on who Jesus was. And they were so expecting, like they knew who he was, but then it looked different than they were expecting, right? Because he had been crucified, and everything they thought, like that they were expecting this kingdom on earth to change, not understanding that this was a long game, right? Like thinking like, okay, they're going to defeat Rome. It's going to be, and Jesus is crucified, which not only is it like a disappointment of what they were expecting, but it must be heartbreaking because this is a person that they were following and living with and a friend, and of course you're going to be like, I'm not getting my hopes up again. Don't try and get my hopes up again. I can't go through them being crushed again. I can't get that heart sickness again, right? And so he's like, I'm not going to believe unless this, unless that. And then, of course, later on, um, Jesus appears again when they're all there and singles him out and says, and does all the things like, I won't believe unless I can put my hand in his side and all of these things. So he has him do all of those things and says, now don't be doubting, but believe, right? But no one else, like we say, oh, doubting Thomas, but we don't know if anybody else would have responded that way or not, because nobody else was given that invitation to faith, that opportunity to trust, because they all saw him the first time. And so they believed, right? And Thomas had been given an opportunity to believe without seeing. And then Jesus even says to him, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. So he'd been given an opportunity to believe without seeing, to receive a blessing of that. And he missed it. But he was shown what was going on in his heart, right? And but I just always think of that, like how interesting it is that some people are given that option, that opportunity for faith that other people may never have to have. Like they never get that opportunity to have faith because it's just there. It just works. It's just okay, whatever, And to recognize those opportunities, because there is some kind of blessing in that when we are able to believe without seeing, when we are able to come to that bitter water and go, okay, Lord, how do I make this water sweet? How do I do what the next thing is? Because you wouldn't have brought me 3 days through this and then brought me to water to just make me miserable and feel sad because I can't drink it. Like that's not who God is. There must be something here. There must be something, to have that attitude of expectancy when we run into those things that that make us almost lose hope, and that hope deferred makes the heart sick, to heal that, so we don't allow that heart to become sick. So we put our hope back in the Lord and not just in what we thought he was providing that maybe didn't go like we expected. And to accept that invitation to faith, even though we don't see, and so that we can receive that special blessing that the Lord mentions. And so anyways, that's my spiel, I guess. I'm done. I'll stop talking because I know I can get myself rambling like crazy.